and the house, the place, and the city, and the heart, and the mountain, and the refuge, and the cave, and the valley, and the land, and the sea, and the island, and the meadow, where mention of God hath been made, and his praise glorified. So before we get started, as you've noted, there's this pop-up that came on the screen that this portion of the evening will be recorded. So if you want to close your video cameras, you're welcome to do so. Once the presentation is over, the recording will end, at which point there will be a Q&A portion where you're welcome to ask questions, make comments, etc. So I'd like to introduce our speakers for this evening. We have Heather and Carl Lokko, who are joining us this evening to speak about our health and what really matters. They have been together since 1993 and have 3 sons. And Heather, born in Canada, is a nurse with a Master's of Public Health degree, working in public health for over 24 years. She is currently the director and the chief nursing officer at the Middlesex London Health Unit, while Carl was born and raised in Ghana and came to Canada in 1991 to do his Master's of Social Work degree. So he's been working for many years in the brain injury rehabilitation sector, has had a private psychotherapy and hypnotherapy practice for over 14 years, serving individuals, couples, and families in London and throughout Southwestern Ontario. So we're happy to have these two speak. So I will turn the table to you two. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hilary and Iman. It's wonderful to be here with everyone this evening. And we will start by just sharing our screen. We have some slides that we're going to walk through with you. So just bear with me for a moment, please, as we get this ready. Okay, can everyone see that? Excellent. I saw a thumbs up, Faye. Thank you so much.
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. So for this evening, we have a few goals for this time together. We are just going to start by very briefly sharing some definitions of health, talking about the interconnection of the different dimensions of health. Then we'll spend a fair amount of time talking about health equity, inequities, and the social determinants of health, and how upstream, midstream, and downstream approaches to promoting health can really make a difference to both our individual and our community health. Then we'll also talk about the spiritual foundations for health and healing, the importance of safeguarding our health, and then we'll get a little bit into stress management and talk about some practical strategies for supporting our mental health and well-being. And throughout the process this evening, we will be integrating perspectives both from science as well as from the Baha'i writings.
So health, there are many definitions of health. If I should ask any of you what you think health is, I think that many people out in the community would say that health is when I feel well. It's about whether I feel well or not, and I'm healthy if I feel well. But there is a more in-depth definition of health from the literature. Health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity, according to the World Health Organization. Now, this definition, although it's more expansive than how we would define health in the streets in our day-to-day life, is still not fulsome enough, not wholesome enough. And so there's another definition of health. It is physical, spiritual, mental, emotional, environmental, social, cultural, and economic wellness of the individual, family, and community. What I find interesting about the second definition is that it defines health in terms of a person from within as an individual, the person's relatedness to people near, such as family, people a little further, such as community, and people even further away, such as our whole world and environment. And more importantly, it also talks about spiritual connectedness. So it is the two big things in this second, three big things are how connected we are from our individual selves all the way to the universe and beyond, and our spirituality, our relationship with God. So that is how we are going to try to frame our conversation this evening.
In addition to the comprehensive definition of health that we'll be looking at, we're also going to be using the framework of health equity and the social determinants of health to help us look at health in this broad context. So I want to just pause for a moment and talk about mental health. We are going to talk about mental health farther down in the presentation, and Carl will have lots of really helpful things to contribute there. But what we just wanted to highlight is that there are a lot of different frameworks and ways of thinking about mental health. And this is a really interesting one I just wanted to draw people's attention to. This is the First Nations Mental Wellness Continuum framework that was developed in 2015. And this framework has, so as you can see, has a lot of information in it, looking at influencing factors, treatment and services, policies, populations at risk, all, and in particular, all within the context and foundation of Indigenous cultures. But for us, what I think for those of us who may not be within the Indigenous community, there's still so much to learn from this and to gain from this. And one of the things that I really love about this way of thinking about mental health is the blue circle there that's right in the center of the framework, which highlights that our mental wellness is so tied to 4 areas. And one is a sense of purpose in our daily lives, a sense of hope for our future and for the future of our families, a sense of belonging and connectedness within our families and within our communities, and a sense of meaning and understanding of how our life connects to the universe, to the world around us, and to creation. So if anyone's interested in taking a look more closely at this continuum, I would encourage you to do so. Yeah.
The interconnectedness of health is an important frame of reference for discussing health. So that is also shown in the Bahá'í writings. And I'm going to read 3 of them. The first is, regard ye the world as a man's body. So think about the world as a man's body. Man means using the word man for humanity, which is afflicted with diverse ailments, and the recovery of which dependeth upon the harmonizing of all its component elements. The second is, matters related to man's spirit have a great effect on his bodily condition. The third, when the body is wholly subjected to disease and misfortune, it is deprived of the bounty of the spirit, like a mirror, which when it becomes broken or dirty or dusty, cannot reflect the rays of the sun, nor any longer show its bounties. So what's really interesting about these 3 quotes to me is that they emphasize the 4 dimensions we mentioned: physical, spiritual, mental, emotional, environmental, social, cultural and economic aspects. The definitions also, apart from defining what health is about, it also talks about the notion that we don't just sit there and then we are fine. That you take care of this body in physical ways, in spiritual ways, and it includes managing our environment and our connections with each other. So health has a wide dimension, and an example will be, I'll use a concrete example because I work with people who have chronic pain. We used to think that pain is something that's just physical. If you walk and you bump your head into something, you are going to hold the place and say, ouch, this hurts, or you break your arm, it's a physical thing. But a broken arm or a terrible headache affects so many things. It affects your composure, your demeanor, whether you are cranky or not, whether you can go to work or not, whether you can help people or not, whether you can help yourself or not. And it just has so many cascading effects. So it's important that when we think about health, we think about it in a much more multifaceted and multidimensional way.
So shifting from that interconnectedness, want to start thinking a little bit about health equity. So there's an image here on the screen. I don't know if you can see the words very clearly in that little comic, but there's a gentleman sitting behind a desk with a row of candidates in front of the desk. And the individual behind the desk is saying, for a fair selection. Oh, and I should say that the animals that are there are, I think, a dog, a seal, a fish in a fishbowl, an elephant, a penguin, and a monkey. And the gentleman says, for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. And clearly, the animals that are there are going to have some distinct advantages and disadvantages in being able to achieve that goal. And this is a little bit like equity and health equity. With health equity, we understand that not all people have the same chance to reach their full potential. So when we see health equity in action, we see that people really do, in fact, have a fair chance to reach their full health potential, and they're not disadvantaged by social, economic, or environmental conditions. So often we think about health as someone's personal health choices, and that if someone is not healthy, it's because they didn't make the right choice, or they didn't do the right thing. And health equity really helps us to see that health is actually so much bigger than that, and the choices that people make even are influenced by so many factors, many of them beyond their control, that there are and we recognize that people's choices for health are limited by circumstances and the realities that they face. And so if we want to shift health as individuals, if we want to shift health in our community, if we want to shift health of our population, we need to look at reducing those barriers so that everyone can reach their full potential when it comes to their health, when we understand health in that broad context. Here's another image that helps to describe health equity. You can see that many people think of equity as equality, but it's different. So with the image on the left, you can see that there are 3 individuals that come to this situation with very different resources in terms of their height. And so their own height is different when they're trying to look over this fence, and yet they all are given equal amount of resources to support their efforts to watch the game over the fence. And you can see that when they're given the same resources, they don't have the same outcome in terms of their ability to engage in the activity that they're trying to engage in. With equity, what we do is take a look at the resources and the conditions and the realities that people are starting with. And we then allocate resources such that those who require more resources to have equal opportunity to reach their potential can, in fact, reach that potential. I have seen another version of this that actually adds another picture to the right, which actually shows the individuals, rather than looking through a wooden fence, they're looking through a chain link fence so that they don't need any boxes at all to see the game. And that's really speaking to the fact that equity, there are many systemic factors that influence equity. And so we need to be looking at those systems and what we can do to change those systems to create greater equity. Health inequities are health differences that are, there's kind of three components to them. They're systematic. So these are health differences that are patterned, where we see health generally improve, for instance, as socioeconomic status improves. So for instance, poor health outcomes we see in lower income populations. Poor health outcomes are seen in lower income populations, and I'll show you some other slides to really emphasize that. Indigenous individuals, individuals from racialized groups, are people with disabilities. These are people who systematically we see that these people have poor health. It doesn't mean that every single person in that group has poor health. That's when you're looking at things as an individual. But when you're looking at it at a population level, we can see that pattern, that overall these groups have poorer health. Health inequities are also differences that are socially produced, therefore could be avoided. For example, we know that the experience of racism has very significant negative impacts on health and well-being. And whether that is emotional impacts, whether that is because people can't get a job and because of discrimination, therefore they have economic impacts to their health. But that's a very great example of a socially produced health inequity that absolutely could be avoided. And the last characteristic of a health inequity is that it's unfair or unjust, because these opportunities for health and well-being are limited, and these limitations are put on certain groups of people, but not on others. So when we're talking about the social determinants of health, there are different lists of social determinants of health. This one in particular is really, I really particularly like this one, and this one is often used here in Canada. Raphael talks about, you can see here the whole list of factors that really influence health, things like income, education, food insecurity, housing, access to health service, the social safety net. Income is frequently described as the most important social determinant of health because it has so many impacts in so many different ways. Some groups have, as I mentioned, disproportionate negative impacts. So in Canada, our data demonstrates clear disparities that Indigenous individuals have shorter life expectancy, higher infant mortality, higher rates of chronic disease, higher rates of infectious disease. And there are a lot of systemic reasons for this. It's not because people are just merely making poor choices about what food they eat, for instance, or their health behaviors. Intersectionality is another thing that's really important as we think about the social determinants of health, and we'll get to that in a few moments, but I want you to keep this list in mind as we talk about intersectionality. Another social determinant of health that was on the original list when the Ottawa Charter was developed in the 80s was peace. And this is one that we don't think very often about in Canada because we live in a country where there is peace. But definitely being in a place without conflict puts people at an advantage in terms of being able to reach their health potential. So this next one here, a lot of people, a very common way of thinking about health and what contributes to health is thinking that our ability to access a family doctor, ability to get to the hospital, ability to purchase medications, that is like the biggest factor in what influences our health. But in fact, our ability to access health and the healthcare system itself, the treatment system itself, only impacts our health by about 25%. 50% of our health is impacted by the social and economic environment in which we which we grow up and in which we find ourselves. 10% is our physical environment, and 15% is our biology or genetic endowment. A lot of people are surprised to see this, but it's a really important thing to keep in mind as we think about how we can improve our health and improve the health of our communities around us. So this here is, these are two different ways of talking about health inequities. So when the image on the left, you can see that there are these bars here. This shows that people with the lowest income, they're on the far left there, people with the lowest income actually have the lowest health. And as you move up the socioeconomic gradient, you can see that health increases significantly as you go up. And so the difference between, for instance, the highest here and the lowest here, that's called a health gap. And these health gaps is one of the ways that we often talk about health inequities. This is a similar graph. This is health gradient. And this is basically taking it's a linear demonstration of, or depiction, thank you, of that health gap. And when we are trying to address health inequities, what we're trying to do is level up. We're trying to shift up that gradient so that it's not so steep. And when we're able to do that, we can see that there is greater equity in health. I've got some slides here. I apologize, they look horrible. I actually took pictures at a conference that I was at, and that's all, but they're such great representations of what I want to try to talk about here. So just really, really briefly, you can see on this graph that, and actually the concept that's really being shown here is that as we have within a country or within a community or within a country, the greater distinction we have between the greater inequity that we have, the more health and social problems we are likely to see. So if we can reduce those inequities, we actually see health and social problems improving, diminishing across the entire community or the entire country. So being able to reduce that level of, or the difference, the distinct difference between the lowest and highest income, for instance, can have a significant difference. So here you can see, I don't know, I'm hoping you can see, there are a number of indicators that were looked at to kind of measure health and social problems. So things like homicides, imprisonment, obesity, mental illness, life expectancy, literacy, and others. And you can see that in the countries where there is less inequity, so that's someone like Sweden, for instance, they have their health gap is smaller. And because their health gap is smaller, they see far fewer problems, those health and social problems, than somewhere like Portugal that has a very significant gap in the health gap. Here's another example of the similar thing, but you can see that as countries are as they're more unequal, the index of child well-being goes down. So the more equal they are, the healthier the healthier their children are. The greater the inequality, the poorer the health of their children. And that, of course, is a very significant factor to think about, because the children who are unhealthy are likely to be adults who are unhealthy. Another one here, same idea, but this is measuring social mobility. So the ability of people to move from one level of income to another level of income, to shift between those gaps. You can see that the greater the inequality is, the harder it is for people to shift from one income status to another. This one is really interesting. This is a picture of the tube or the subway in London, England. And they did a study to find that found that when you traveled east on the subway, and in London, my understanding is that at the farther east you go, the more income disparity that you see. And they found that actually each tube stop represented approximately 1 year of life expectancy lost because of that. And we're attributing it to the income disparity, and how, because we know income affects health so significantly. So we really want to do our best to create greater equity. This is just a quick depiction of people if you start at the lower one, people in the United States who would like to see the distribution of income. This is how they'd like to see the distribution of income in the country. This is what they think it is. The yellow is the people who are the highest 20%, the bottom 20% are here. This is what they think it is. This is what the actual distribution of wealth is in the US. And so you can see that there is quite a significant inequality here.
there's a distortion.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so that gives you some overview of health equity and what we're talking about related to health equity. And here we're going to talk a little bit about intersectionality. Over to you.
So intersectionality is another big term that has been introduced into the literature. We have equity and equality, and we have intersectionality. So what is interesting about intersectionality is, to me anyway, is that it seeks to let us look deeper and to not assume that if somebody is financially endowed, then they don't have any health problems. They won't have much health problems, because that is not true from the definitions that we've had. So there are two examples that we have here of a person, two different people that have diabetes. So one is male, a white person who has suffered physical abuse as a child in urban Ontario. They own a nice big home. Their friends and family are near. They have a part-time job. They have steady paycheck, and they have university education, and they have a family doctor. So there are a lot of people who think, well, everything should be peachy for them. But they do have diabetes, just like somebody else who is a woman from the Middle East. They've moved from relative to relative because there is war where they came from. They live in a temporary refugee housing, or housing for refugees. They've left their family and friends behind. They don't have a job yet because they don't speak English. And they have government assistance for now. They did not complete grade 12 because they've come from a place where the most important thing is to survive and keep your life. And it doesn't matter how clever you are, you just can't go to school. Now, these two individuals have diabetes, which affects their health. And so when we think about supports for them, the support they need isn't just to see a family doctor and get insulin. That is only a wee bit of what each of them needs. One of them needs help with a physician and medications and all of that, but they also need community. They need mental health support. They need to find themselves. They need to belong. They need to, and money doesn't speak to people. Money doesn't talk. The other just needs to see several barriers taken away from their path to clean the dust that's covering the mirror that they have so they can really shine. So this is a perspective that we want to posit for looking at health when we are thinking about health. Although Heather did point out the percentages, and I think it is quite telling that 50% of the contributors have to do with social determinants and community belonging. I think Mother Teresa once said that the greatest things that she learned in life is that every human being needs to be able to love and be loved. I thought that was a pretty profound thing, and that, of course, has a lot to do with our health. So we can't talk about health without talking about systemic oppression. We just can't. So health becomes wholesome when you can really display what talent you have. You are able to impact things around you, beyond you, in a very positive way. And when we talk about systemic oppression, that includes barriers that are deliberately put in place to prevent people from being able to progress. So for instance, if people cannot get a job, I remember many years ago when I was looking for my first job, my resume has my name, Carl Lokko, on it. And I was invited to an interview, and when I got there, I knew right away from the look on the person's face that they didn't expect Carl Lokko to be me.
To be Black, to be frank.
And of course, I never heard anything about that job. Not even a courtesy call to tell me, oh, you didn't get it, right? So there are many, many people, women, men, women, and some are mainstream people, some are minorities who are very well educated, but don't have the social capital and connections to get a job to improve their lot. And of course, it affects their health outcomes. They can't tell their children, go to school and study, because their kids would say, but you are very educated and you don't have a job. Why are you telling me to go to school? So we need to think about how to move institutional barriers, which have been deliberately created or innocuously created. So that would be some of what we have in terms of looking at systems and how they impact individuals, families, communities, and society.
Absolutely. And so as we are looking at this systemic oppression and trying to address it, as well as these other social determinants of health, you might be feeling like, wow, this is, how do we tackle this? How do we address this? So there's a quick story I want to tell you very quickly. I realize our time is going by so fast, and we need to get to our some of our writings. So there's a story that says that a man was walking by the river and he heard someone shouting for help, and he looked and saw that the person was drowning. So he jumped in the water to save this individual. Just as he pulled the person out, another person came down and started, he was flowing down the river and he was also drowning. So he jumped in and he pulled him out. This kept happening. And then there were more and more and more people falling in the river and drowning. So he called for people to come and help me pull these people out of the river. They recognized that they couldn't keep up with the flow of people coming down the river that were drowning. And so they decided they better walk upstream and find out what was happening that was causing all these people to fall in the river. Because they couldn't keep up with the downstream efforts to support them, they needed to move upstream and change the cause, impact the cause of what was happening. So similarly, when we think about all these social determinants of health, we need to be looking at downstream, midstream, and upstream interventions to try to impact our health. And I'm just going to give you an example. You can see the definitions of each of those there. I'm just going to give a quick example of that. So for instance, if we talk about tobacco, we know that tobacco, it's very well established that tobacco has significant impacts on people's health. So if we are looking at trying to impact and change the use of tobacco, if we're looking at a downstream example, that would be providing individuals who smoke with smoking cessation programs and supplying them with nicotine replacement therapy to help them quit smoking. And that would reduce the short and long-term impacts of the cigarettes that they've been smoking. That's the downstream example. When you get to midstream, that's looking at things like in London, where we have bylaws that prevent the use of tobacco to reduce secondhand smoke in public places, so that the impacts of tobacco use are limited and through that bylaw and legislation. So that's an example of a midstream intervention. An upstream intervention is something completely different. We know that smoking is much higher, the smoking rates are much higher in people who are experiencing poverty. So an upstream approach would be to actually engage in a poverty reduction strategy. If we can reduce poverty, we can reduce the use of tobacco. So those are examples of how we try to look at changing the health outcomes in our communities. We do want to now move into these social determinants of health and take a look at them. This is going to be a really quick run through. Each of these topics could be an entire presentation in and of itself. We just want to try to get your interest and pique your interest in thinking about how both science and the Baha'i writings provide us guidance in relation to understanding the social determinants of health and thinking about the importance of addressing these, understanding these and addressing these. When we talk about the Baha'i writings, we have a number of writings that are from Baha'u'llah, who's the founder of the Baha'i faith, as well as Abdul Baha, who is his eldest son, who was the perfect exemplar of the faith, and Shoghi Effendi, who's the grandson of Abdul Baha, who was the guardian of the faith for a number of years. So we're going to take a look through these and try to provide you with just a little taste, both from the science perspective and the Baha'i writing perspective. So the first one is access to healthcare, which we know is important. It's not the most important, but it's important. There is definitely a huge body of knowledge that talks about the importance of access to healthcare and the need to ensure that there's equitable access to healthcare for people's well-being. And it's a fairly obvious one. If people have need treatment and can't get treatment, we know that that's going to impact their health. And by health, there's also, there's various types of healthcare. There's the traditional Western medicine. There's also counseling. There's osteopathy. There's acupuncture. There's many different kinds of healthcare that people nowadays can access, that they can access to improve their health. And then we have some couple of quotes that talk about the importance of accessing healthcare. I think you were going to read them.
So here is one quote which I think it's a very good one to reflect upon. It is incumbent upon everyone to seek medical treatment and to follow the doctor's instructions, for this is in compliance with the divine ordinance. But in reality, he who giveth healing is God. The second one, actually, before I go to the second one, I'll tell you something interesting my mom said to me. In 2014, I got injured and I had to have surgery on my neck. So I phoned my mom to tell her I was badly injured and she should pray for me. And she said, "My son, you are already healed, because the doctors who are going to see you, they are instruments of God. They will do their work and you will be fine." And I am. So yes, the second one, healing through purely spiritual forces, is undoubtedly as inadequate as that which materialist physicians and thinkers vainly seek to obtain by resorting entirely to mechanical devices and methods. The best result can be obtained by combining the two processes, spiritual and physical.
Great. The next is lifestyle. So this is, as I mentioned, many people think that lifestyle is the main reason that people are or are not healthy. And as we've talked about, it's not the main one. However, it still does have an impact. And I'm sure all of you are aware of the large body of research on many of these lifestyle factors, on exercise, sleep, managing stress, on nutrition, on smoking. Many research studies have been done to show the connection between lifestyle and health. And we are very fortunate that we have a plethora of guidelines, of position statements, of resources, of tools, of services that we can access to help support us in a healthy lifestyle. So this is certainly something we need to be thinking about. We have an example of a quote from the writings that speaks about lifestyle as well. This one speaks specifically to the use of substances. And I just did want to point out, as we think about substances, that there are many reasons, as we know, for problematic substance use. For many people, it's coping with trauma. For some people, there are no children. When you ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? There's no one who says, I want to be someone who is a person who is addicted to drugs. There are many life situations that lead people into problematic substance use. So I just wanted to be conscious of that as we look at this code as well, the needs for harm reduction and treatments for this particular issue. But if you don't mind reading the quote, that would be great.
And the Baha'i code that supports this, one of such codes, is, O ye God's loved one. O ye God's loved one. Experience has shown how greatly the renouncing of smoking, of intoxicating drink, and of opium conduceth to health and vigor, to the expansion and keenness of the mind and bodily strength.
Thank you. So a clear direction pointing to the connection between lifestyle and health. Another is nutrition and food security. We have in Canada some very significant issues with food security and inability to access healthy food. And the pandemic has unfortunately dramatically increased this issue across the country, and disproportionately children are affected by food insecurity. This is a really, really significant issue. When it comes to nutrition, we have also, I think, a difficulty in our society with so much processed food and sugar and salt. But we do have Canada's food guide to help us. We know from research that poor nutrition does very significantly impact health and well-being from a whole variety of conditions and diseases. But we do have Canada's food guide to help guide us. And we have, I wanted to just talk briefly about some of the work that happens even here in London with food councils and many other cities across Canada that are groups of people working on improving food security, looking at reducing food deserts, reducing food waste, reducing cost, supporting community gardening, many different strategies to address food insecurity. And there are lots of resources online. There's a link there if anyone is interested in taking a look at that website. There's lots of good information there. And we hear from the writings also about the importance of food and agriculture. And agriculture, of course, is such a core element of food security.
So on food security, Bahá'í urges that special regard be paid to the interests of agriculture. And here is a quote on that. At whatever time, highly skilled physicians shall have developed the healing of illnesses by means of foods, and shall make provision of simple foods, and shall prohibit humankind from living as slaves to their lustful appetites. It is certain that the incidence of chronic and diversified illnesses will abate, and the general health of all mankind will be much improved.
Thank you, Carl. Employment. So we know from research that it's both employment status, so whether people have full-time work, part-time work, casual, no work at all, we know that employment status impacts health and well-being. We also know that it's employment conditions. And I should say with employment status, also even there's a difference between people who have guaranteed permanent employment and those who are perpetually living in very precarious employment. Employment conditions are also important from a health and safety perspective, workplace harassment. There are many conditions in employment that impact health. And we do have, of course, health and safety legislation. We have legislation around workplace harassment to try to address these issues because we know that they impact health. And we also know, even in our community, there are many employment and training centers that support individuals to gain the skills that they need to acquire employment because of its impact on health. And I quote,
it is enjoined upon every one of you to engage in some form of occupation, such as crafts, trades, and the like. We have graciously exalted your engagement in such work to the rank of worship unto God, the true one. So it is very important for our health to be able to develop or help develop the skills that we can use to work and make a living.
For me, this one, if we had more time, I'd love to dive into this idea of work as the rank of worship. That's incredible. And it's interesting to think about how that can shift our thinking about the value and importance of work and of our own work. Okay, I'm just realizing it's 20 after 8 already, so we're going to have to really zip along here. So education, again, we know education impacts health and well-being because of its ability to open doors for us to future opportunities and to have stable incomes later in our life. We are fortunate that we live in a country where there's significant investment in education systems, both elementary and secondary, as well as opportunities to support those who may have difficulty to get to post-secondary to be able to do that. Recognizing there are different perspectives on the current quality of our educational system and where those issues are of a concern, we certainly do need to take a look at those. Although compared to many countries, we have a very, very strong educational system, and our literacy rate as a country is very excellent. A couple of quotes about education.
But education is three kinds: material, human, and spiritual. Material growth and development of the body, securing its sustenance, obtaining the body's ease and comfort. Human, civilization and progress, governance, social order, human welfare, commerce and industry, arts and sciences. Spiritual, education of the kingdom, acquiring divine perfections. Baha'u'llah has announced that in as much as ignorance and lack of education are barriers of separation among mankind, all must receive training and instruction. Universal education is a universal law. It is therefore incumbent upon every father to teach and instruct his children according to his possibilities. If he is unable to educate them, the body politic, the representative of the people, must provide the means for their education.
It is through education, material, human, and spiritual education, that we are transformed as individuals, as families, as communities, and as society as a whole. Income and income distribution. Again, a huge body of research on income and its impact on health and well-being. And there are many different ways, several different ways of measuring income. Lots of, if people are interested in details on that, we can send some resources along. But very clear links, and income distribution is, as you've seen in some of the earlier slides, one of the most significant social determinants of health. Here in our country, we have minimum wage legislation, we have a taxation system, and we have poverty reduction strategies occurring in many large cities across Canada. It is still a significant issue that we need to address in our country, for sure, in order to improve the health of our communities. Well,
so this quote tells me that it just gives another example of how far-sighted Baha'u'llah's teachings were. Because today in Canada, there's a lot of talk about looking at a minimum wage that is going to be a basic way to
guaranteed basic income.
To create guaranteed basic income. But way back then, Baha'u'llah said, so one of Baha'u'llah's teachings is the adjustment of means of livelihood in human society. And that this adjustment There can be no extremes in human condition as regards wealth and sustenance. Baha'u'llah set forth principles of guidance and teaching for economic readjustment. Regulations were revealed by him which ensure the welfare of the Commonwealth.
And that welfare being from the individual aspect of reduced cancer, heart disease, diabetes, mental health, but also, of course, the broader economic welfare of the whole country. Mm-hmm. I am feeling like we're okay. I guess we'll just keep going a little bit faster here. Social inclusion, meaningful participation in social, economic, cultural, and political systems is associated with positive mental health and physical health. And you can see the definition of social inclusion there and what a socially inclusive society is. And a couple of examples in our community is a program called Bridges Out of Poverty. If anyone is interested in taking a look, it's a fascinating program. I'd encourage you to look it up. There are many supports for newcomers. There are programs such as the Spectrum to enable families that are living in poverty or with low income to be able to engage in society through programs, city programs, all kinds of recreation and skill building programs. And we have a couple of quotes that talk about social inclusion as well and the importance of social inclusion. One of the greatest foundations of the religion of God, the significance of the word of God, and the duty of the believers of God is mutual assistance and cooperation. Prejudice, whether it be religious, racial, patriotic, or political in its origin and aspect, is the destroyer of human foundations and opposed to the commands of God. God has sent forth his prophets for the sole purpose of creating love and unity in the world of human hearts. Social inclusion is the way we are intended to be. Social safety net. Carl, you talked about this a little bit already with the guaranteed basic income. We also, there are a number of other ideas here, a number of examples here, sorry, that talk about the social safety net we have in our country. Many other countries do not have a social safety net, which increases the disparities between low and high income folks. I was going to talk a bit about guaranteed basic income, but I'll skip that.
Because we've touched on it.
We have a little bit.
But a quote, another quote related to this by Baha'u'llah is, if a person is disabled, stricken by dire poverty, or becomes helpless, then it is incumbent upon the rich or the trustees to provide him with a monthly allowance for his subsistence. Basically, that the society needs to take care of those who are not feeling well.
Early child development. It is fascinating to me as we went through this process of taking a look at the social determinants of health and exploring the Baha'i writings. It was so fascinating to see how every single social determinant of health had something in the Baha'i writings, and the comprehensiveness of the Baha'i writings is fabulous. So this is another one, early child development. We know from research, this is more recent research, that the first 1,000 days of a child's life have a significant impact on their mental health, the incidence of chronic disease in them as adults, their future involvement with the justice system, use of substances, and it goes on and on and on. The first 1,000 days is the most critical time in a person's life that impacts their health and well-being. We also have really strong research around breastfeeding and many strategies locally, internationally to promote breastfeeding, because we know that breastfeeding has many, many health benefits and improves the health and well-being of infants and children well into their adulthood. Positive parenting is also has a significant impact on a child's ability to reach their full potential and to securely attach to their parents. So we'll just move right into the quote on this one. I could go on about this for a long time, but move right into the quote. The child must from the day of his birth be provided with whatever is conducive to his health. And know ye this, so far as possible, the mother's milk is best, for more agreeable and better suited to the child, unless she should fall ill or her milk should run entirely dry. Rather, they should endeavor to inculcate gently and patiently into their youthful minds such principles of moral conduct, Discipline is to be carried out gently and patiently and with loving care, far removed from the anger and violence with which children are beaten and abused in some parts of the world. To treat children in such an abhorrent manner is a denial of their human rights and a betrayal of the trust which the weak should have in the strong. Absolutely critical for early child development. Gender. Gender is, again, a link there if you're interested in looking at some of the Gender Equality Advisory Council recommendations. This is, again, a well-established distinction in health. Many of the health research has been done on men, and this disadvantages women in terms of the treatments that are available. We also know that gender impacts income, many different aspects of health. All the social determinants of health there's an intersectionality for sure with gender. Because people are really familiar with this, I'm not going to get into it more. And yes, the quote here that we wanted to share is, there are actually many beautiful quotes in the Baha'i writings about the importance of gender equality. And this is an example. The world of humanity has two wings. One is women and the other men. Not until both wings are equally developed can the bird fly. Should one wing remain weak, flight is impossible. Not until the world of women becomes equal to the world of men in the acquisition of virtues and perfections can success and prosperity be attained as they ought to be. And so if this is an area that you're interested in, there are really some beautiful writings and guidance around gender in the Baha'i writings. And I think this is the last one, environmental health. Clear links, we know that our environment impacts our health. Things like allergies, exposure to toxins, skin cancer, severe weather events and their impact on our health. We also know there's actually some emerging research that's talking about the positive impact of exposure to nature. When people are given opportunities to be in nature, there is a measurable positive impact on their health and well-being. And we have a quote here: "Were one to observe with an eye that discovereth the realities of all things, it would become clear that the greatest relationship that bindeth the world of being together lieth in the range of created things themselves, and that cooperation, mutual aid, and reciprocity are essential characteristics in the unified body of the world of being, inasmuch all created things are closely related together, and each is influenced by the other, or deriveth benefit therefrom, either directly or indirectly." And there's certainly within the Baha'i faith a real sense of the importance of environmental sustainability and caring for the earth. Okay, those are the social determinants of health. We were hoping to also talk a little bit about the spiritual foundation for health and healing, and talk a little bit about mental health. So we'll move into that. Do you want to read the first quote here? And I'll.
So I'm going to read two quotes. "Now, if thou wishest to know the true remedy which will heal man from all sickness and will give him the health of the divine kingdom, know that it is the precepts and teachings of God. Focus thine attention upon them. Every branch of learning co-joined with the love of God is approved and worthy of praise, but bereft of his love, learning is barren.
Strive day and night that thou mayest become highly qualified in this science. And when thou wishest to dispense treatment, set thy heart toward the Abha kingdom, entreating divine confirmations." So Carl's going to talk a little bit about why it's important to safeguard our health and share a quote.
You should not neglect your health, but consider it the means which enables you to serve. It, the body, is like a horse which carries the personality and spirit, and as such should be cared for so it can do its work. You should certainly safeguard your nerves and force yourself to take time, and not only for prayer and meditation, but to real rest and relaxation.
Great.
Why is it important to safeguard our community's health? I think we've talked.
I think
we'll
skip over that because of time as well. But in terms of thinking about the real rest and relaxation, let's move into talking a little bit about emotional health and stress management, Carl. And here we start with a quote. I'll read this one. Verily, the most necessary thing is contentment under all circumstances. By this, one is preserved from morbid conditions and from lassitude. Yield not to grief and sorrow. They cause the greatest misery. Jealousy consumes the body, and anger doth burn the liver. Avoid these two as you would a lion. So a very clear quote around the impact of emotional health and well-being. Do you want to add anything to that?
I think it's pretty straightforward.
We'll carry on.
So stress. Everybody experiences stress. Any situation that triggers a person's fight or flight response is how we think about stress. If we perceive that the demands of the situation are greater than our ability to respond or cope, then our body switches to a stress response. And usually when I'm talking about stress, I'd say that it's internal, it's external, it can be chemical in nature, it can be organic. Stress can be positive or negative, right? But in terms of our well-being, when we think about stress, we want to try to understand this idea that when we are anxious, for instance, is it for a positive reason or a negative one? Anxiety becomes negative when you perceive something as a threat, and then you feel you don't have what it takes to manage that threat. Then you are going to be very, very anxious. The opposite is also true. Stress can increase our focus, creativity, and efficiency. So I won't go too much into that because we don't have as much time. Instead, I would say that learn something called chain analysis. Learn what contributes to your stress. What are the contributors to the stress that you are experiencing? Using some of the heuristics that we've talked about. Is it lack of community? Is it because you don't have a job? Is it because there are systemic barriers? And then think about what you can manage yourself and what you can seek help with. There are a lot of people who think that there isn't a way around the challenges that they have. This is part of why being spiritual is important, because when you are spiritual, you don't have to see an answer to have hope that there can be one. But we also have a community, and you just simply need to reach out, and there will be somebody who is going to provide support. I want to give a few quick pointers on managing stress. I don't want to be academic about it because we don't have time. Heather is showing some of what stress creates. Headaches, more frequent migraines, exhaustion, high blood pressure, decreased sex drive, increased use of alcohol and drugs, overreaction to minor events. So note them. If these are going on, you are experiencing stress. Chronic lateness or absenteeism, feeling helpless and hopeless, feeling overwhelmed. You just lash out at the least things. So uncontrolled anger, grief, increased defensiveness. So sometimes when we are stressed by something else, we come home and we vent our spleen on other people who have nothing to do with it, but we don't know that's what we are doing. If you start seeing that you are getting out of sorts, you need to seek some help, some support. Low morale, less ability to feel joy, And also people experience spiritual malaise. They feel apathetic, you experience emptiness, and you feel a loss of direction. It is important that to manage stress, it's good to surround yourself with positivity. And positivity can be people, it can be what you read about. And, you know, I say that our minds are like an advertising board. We choose what to advertise on it. If you advertise positivity, then that's what your experience will be. So let's be mindful, especially in this pandemic and COVID period. We have to be really mindful and be very tactical. We watch what we eat, do exercise, get sufficient sleep. If you are not sleeping, you are going to be wired. Sleep is a very, very important benchmark for determining whether someone is feeling well or not. If you cannot sleep, everything else goes out of work or can. Reduce caffeine intake and have a network of supportive people. I think one of the great things about the Baha'i community are the small networks, the firesides and the feasts and all of these get-togethers are very important for keeping people from being isolated and being weighed down by stress. So we've talked about knowing your stress triggers. So chain analysis simply means ask yourself, what is it that is my issue? What were the contributors to this issue? Can I pinpoint them? What was it that made me vulnerable to them? What have I done in the past that has helped me to manage and overcome? What is my next strategy? That's basically the sequence for doing what we call chain analysis, right? So watch the antecedents to the issue, watch the maintaining variables, and then look at the outcomes. And if you look at these three sequences carefully, you'll be able to find a positive way. You can do a gratitude journal. So every day, write down something positive. If you are having problems with your partner or your kid or anybody, friend, take a gratitude journal, look for something positive, 2-3 positive things about that person. And if you are thinking positively about someone, you cannot simultaneously be mired in negativity. We can practice relaxation exercise. I think last time I did one, and if you want, we can do one. But
I think we'll do it if people want to stay at the end. If people want to stay at the end, Carl has an amazing voice for doing relaxation exercises. So if anyone wants to stay at the end, he'd be happy to do progressive relaxation.
Or talk to me later. That's also okay. Spend some quiet time. You can do body scans, focusing on your body, doing your breathing. And I think I showed how to do 4-square breathing. You can put your issues in compartments. I don't know how many of you know the idea of compartmentalization. So if we think about a physician in the ER department, they can have so many people in there, everybody really has a big problem, but they have a triage person there who tries to organize the people there according to the intensity of need or how dire the issue is, what can wait, what can't wait, what needs to be referred somewhere. Our issues are the same. They are all pressing, but they are not similarly pressing. So compartmentalization is when you write down the various issues that concern you. And then you start to look at the ones you can do something about, the ones you need help to do something about, And then there are some you can't do anything about right away, but maybe later you could. Some you can't do anything about, but they won't affect your life in any tragic manner. So you are going to say, let sleeping dogs lie. An example is being angry at someone who's offended you or differed with you. And you spend a whole lot of time ruminating. The spiritual books teach about forgiveness. Forgive and carry on. This is something you can do easily, effortlessly, and automatically if you practice it. You know.
And lastly, I would say always keeping in mind that if we are needing to reach out and get support for our mental health and emotional well-being, we should never hesitate to see someone who can help us out with that.
Okay. And I want to add just 4 strategies for helping yourself. When you are feeling very stressed, think about your resources. Think about what we call nurturing figures. Who are people in your life that provide you, who are nurturing figures for you? So when I wasn't feeling well, although Heather is a big nurturing figure for me, I also called my mom. She's a nurturing figure for me. And I have friends who are nurturing figures. So think about a nurturing figure and what they mean to you as you deal with a stressful situation. Think about a peaceful place. What is a peaceful place where I can let my mind wander to? Think about protective figures. Who are people who are protective? And they don't have to be physically near. You just focus on protective figures and what they are able to do to support you. And then finally, every human being has a wise self. That wise self is the guidance you have when you are in touch with God and yourself. Who is the wise self? When we meditate and we pray to God to guide for guidance. Okay, so 4 things. Focus on your wise self, the wise nature, the guardian, the guard and the guide. Focus on protective figures, focus on nurturing figures, and think about a peaceful place.
Thank you. Oh, I need to go back. Well, okay, I'm actually, well, maybe I can do it like this. No, I can't. Okay, so I'm just going to stop sharing, just to say that, in summary, we can say that health is complex. There are material and spiritual dimensions to health that we've talked about. And there, as I mentioned, each of these topics of health that we've talked about could go much more in depth. So this has just been a little appetizer, both thinking about it from a science perspective, as well as a little appetizer from the Baha'i writings perspective. And so we're hoping that you leave with a thirst to deepen your understanding and of the value of health and well-being. And we want to challenge you, each of you, to commit to enhancing the health and well-being of ourselves, of our families, of our communities, and of our world through the application of both material and spiritual principles and knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Heather and Carl, for your presentation. It was very thorough and very well done. So thank you. We're going to open it up for Q&A. So whoever's online, we're going to stop the recording